Hello, my dear warriors. Hey, keep replaying it, over and over, like their minds got stuck on a frame they can't escape, like time itself refuses to move forward until they understand what just happened. Because your rise wasn't logical, it wasn't scheduled, it wasn't approved, it just happened, suddenly, silently, undeniably. And now the whole crew is trapped in the playback, trying to figure out what they missed, where they miscalculated. Who gave you permission to grow like that? They're stuck in mental traffic, watching the same moment loop again and again. The moment they thought they knew your limits, the moment they dismissed your potential, the moment they swore you were stuck, only to blink and see you standing somewhere they never imagined you could reach. That's what breaks them. Not your success, but how fast it happened, how unpredictable it was, how it didn't ask for validation, how it didn't match the version of you they built in their heads. You didn't rise by playing their game. You rose by rewriting the rules they tried to measure you with. That's why they're stuck on replay. Humans freeze when reality surprises them. Their minds glitch when someone grows outside the storyline they assigned. They keep asking themselves, how did they do it? When did this happen? How were we not warned? What did we overlook? And the most haunting question of all, were we wrong about everything? Because you weren't supposed to be the exception. You weren't supposed to break their models. You weren't supposed to force them to rethink everything they thought they understood. But legends don't follow systems. Legends bend systems. Legends break patterns and become new ones. You broke the loop, and they got stuck inside it. That's the irony. They thought they were watching you struggle, but now they're watching themselves frozen, confused, replaying the footage, trying to capture the moment the story stopped belonging to them. You never waited for them to catch up. You never asked for their approval. You never slowed down for their pace. You rose like the rulebook was already outdated. Because it was. They're stuck in analysis mode now, playing detective, rewinding every interaction, rewatching every moment they ignored. They're trying to understand how someone they counted out became the name everyone whispers when the room gets quiet. That's the part they can't handle. Not that you rose, but that you rose without warning, without noise, without needing to be seen. Most people announce their grind. You moved in silence. Most people beg for recognition. You built a legacy that didn't need applause to exist. Now they're replaying the footage of your growth, hoping they can find the frame where they should have taken you seriously. But the frame doesn't exist, because you were always serious, always formidable, always building in places their eyes couldn't reach. They tried to slow you down with doubt. They tried to limit you with labels. They tried to trap you with low expectations. But legends don't stay where they're placed. Legends don't live in boxes built by the insecure. Legends expand, break shape, shift gravity, rewrite what's possible. And that's the part they never saw coming. You weren't climbing their ladder. You were creating a new dimension. They thought success had rules. They thought greatness had checkpoints. They thought power had a schedule. But you weren't following a timeline. You were following a calling. And callings don't wait for acceptance. They unfold when the world is least prepared. Now they're looping every scene, looking for logic, looking for signs, looking for the moment they should have feared you. Because now the fear is real. They don't know how to talk about you anymore, not without exposing how wrong they were. not without admitting they misjudged you, not without revealing they never understood your hunger, your vision, your silence, your fire. And here's the real glitch in their system. They thought legends were born with recognition, but the truth is simpler. Legends earn recognition by surviving eras where nobody believed, by rising in the shadows, by working when nobody watches, by proving every assumption wrong. They told themselves a story where you failed. Now they're trapped inside a new one. A story where every replay ends with the same realization. You didn't follow their rules. You became the one who rewrites them. They thought time was on their side. They thought power was inherited. They thought status guaranteed control. But you proved something they never expected. The future doesn't belong to the loudest, or the richest, or the lucky. It belongs to the one who refuses to stop. And now they're watching the proof in real time, over and over, like a glitch in their belief system. They keep replaying your rise, hoping it will make sense on the 10th viewing, the 25th loop, the 100th rewind. But every loop just hurts more, because it reminds them they doubted someone who was quietly becoming inevitable. They can't wrap their minds around it. How someone they ignored is now someone they can't stop watching. How someone they thought was average is now someone they're trying to decode like a myth. You became the topic, the reference point, the unskippable moment. The one person who broke the sequence and forced the universe to update its settings. And here's the twist. They thought the game was rigged, but it was just slow. They thought success was capped, but it was just hidden. They thought your silence meant defeat, but it was the sound of someone sharpening every invisible force. You didn't rise by accident. You rose because pressure never scared you, doubt never stopped you, failure never defined you, and their disbelief? It only fueled the fire. Now they're stuck in the loop, watching, obsessing, trying to steal formulas that weren't meant for them, trying to map a path that only exists because you walked it. That's what legends do. They don't follow footprints. They leave them. You didn't enter the story. You became the turning point. The moment people talk about when they say everything changed, and they can't rewind past it. They can't skip over it. They can't pretend it didn't happen. Because your rise wasn't a highlight, it was a rewrite of the script, of the hierarchy, of the rules everyone assumed were unbreakable. You proved something they never wanted proven. The system isn't sacred. The rules aren't final. The limits aren't real. And now they're replaying it again, hoping the loop gives them comfort, but it won't. Because every time they watch it, the truth gets louder. You didn't just rise, you exposed the smallness of every person who swore you wouldn't. They said you were reaching too far, dreaming too big, moving too fast. They treated your ambition like a glitch, something that needed fixing. Shrinking, taming. But what they never understood is this. The world doesn't evolve because of the comfortable. It evolves because of the ones who refuse to settle. And you, without even trying to prove a point, became the point. Now every person who ever underestimated you is stuck in mental playback, rewinding the rise they swore would never happen. They can't move on. They can't ignore it. They can't explain it. They just keep replaying the same realization. They got it wrong. And not just a little wrong, historically wrong. You weren't a phase. You weren't a spark. You weren't a moment. You were the beginning of something they never learned how to predict. That's why they're obsessed now. They're asking questions they should have asked years ago. Who taught you? How did you learn? Where did this come from? Why didn't we see it sooner? And the truth is simple. They weren't supposed to. Legends never reveal the blueprint before the breakthrough. You built in silence. You suffered in chapters they never read. You kept walking when the road turned invisible. And now they're studying your every move like it's a broadcast from another dimension. Replay. Pause. Zoom in. Try to decode the magic. Try to claim they always believed. But the loop doesn't lie. The memory doesn't lie. Their own words don't lie. They said you'd fail. They said you'd fold. They said you'd fade. And now they're watching you unfold into something unstoppable, something undeniable, something unforgettable. They wanted to be the judges of your story. Now they're just the audience. They wanted to control the narrative. Now they're stuck watching the highlight reel of their own doubt. And while they're stuck in the loop, something else is happening. You're not stopping. You're not slowing. You're not waiting for them to finally understand what was obvious to you the whole time. You don't need their apology, their praise, their approval, their echo, because real legends aren't defined by the crowd. They're defined by the rise, and yours, they'll be replaying it forever. They thought you'd disappear after the first win. They thought the momentum would fade. They thought you'd hit a ceiling they could understand, categorize, and dismiss. But that's the thing about legends. They don't peak. They unfold, layer by layer, level by level, chapter by chapter. And now the crew is stuck watching the story they never believed. Would outgrow the prologue. They're looping every version of you they remember, trying to match it with the one standing here now, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't add up, because you didn't upgrade in the way they expected. You evolved in ways they never considered possible. They thought growth meant louder. You grew quieter and sharper. They thought success meant showing off. You let your results speak, in a language their egos couldn't translate. They thought power meant being seen. You became the storm they could feel long before they understood it. That's what's haunting them now. They can't figure out when it happened, when the shift occurred, when control left their hands, when the narrative stopped belonging to them and started orbiting you instead. So they replay it again and again and again. The conversations, the looks, the silence, the moments they should have paid attention but didn't, the moments they should have asked questions but laughed instead. They keep asking themselves, how did we miss it? But the answer is simple. They weren't looking for greatness. They were waiting for failure. They didn't see your rise because their eyes were focused on the fall they hoped for. But you didn't fall. You didn't break. You didn't quit. You became everything they said you wouldn't, and then became more. And now they're stuck in loop mode because it's too late to deny it. Too late to rewrite it. Too late to pretend they supported what they spent years doubting. That's what they get for betting against someone who wasn't playing their game. You weren't chasing validation. You were building inevitability. And now that it's here, they don't know how to handle it. They look at you now and feel something unfamiliar. Respect, discomfort, fear, admiration, regret, all mixed into one silent stare. Because legends don't just rewrite the rules. They rewrite how people remember them. And now your legacy is something they can't escape, no matter how many times they replay the past. There's a strange kind of panic happening behind the scenes, not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet internal chaos of people realizing they misjudged a legend while thinking they were being wise. They're stuck in the loop, not because they care about the journey you took, but because now they're questioning the journey they wasted. They thought they had time. They thought they understood the pace. They thought they could predict who would rise and who would fade. They thought they were safe watching from a distance, convinced your story would collapse before it mattered. But now the room is different. The tone has changed. The energy is shifting toward you whether they like it or not, and they can't stop it. They can't slow it. They can't reverse it. They can only replay it. You know what makes the loop hurt the most? It's not your success. It's their disbelief turning into truth. They can no longer deny. They used to laugh at your ambition. Now they whisper your name like it's something powerful, something formidable, something they should have respected sooner. They used to overlook you. Now they overthink you. They used to see you as optional. Now they treat you like a variable that changes the entire equation. It's hitting them slowly but deeply. You were not just another player in the game. You were the shift waiting to happen, the unexpected outcome, the rewritten rule book. And now they're wondering how many doors they could have walked through if they learned from your hunger instead of mocking it. How many levels they could have reached if they weren't so busy doubting you. How many times they could have risen to if they weren't waiting for you to fail first. But you didn't. And now they're stuck between jealousy and awe, regret and silence, pride and truth. They wanted to see you fall. Instead, they watched you rise. And now they're watching themselves stay exactly where they are. Legends don't just win. They expose the ones who refuse to grow. And you? You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to prove anything. You just kept moving, kept climbing, kept becoming. And now every loop shows the same reality. You were never meant to fit their expectations. You were meant to break them. They can't stop replaying it, and they never will. Here's the part they'll never admit out loud. They didn't just doubt you. They needed you to fail. Your struggle made them comfortable. Your silence made them feel superior. Your mistakes made them feel safe in their own smallness. But when you rose, not slowly, not politely, but undeniably, their entire worldview cracked. Because if you could rise, then what was their excuse? If you could win on your own terms, then what was stopping them? If you could rewrite the rules, then maybe the rules were never real. That's why they're looping the footage, running it back over and over like investigators at a scene, trying to find the moment everything changed. But the truth is brutal. There was no moment. There was no switch. There was no miracle. You were rising while they were watching, evolving while they were laughing, becoming while they were waiting for your story to end. And now the story isn't over. It's too big, too alive, too powerful to ignore. You shattered the script they trusted. You exposed the limits they worshipped. You proved that legends aren't chosen. Legends choose themselves. And now the crew is stuck in mental paralysis. Every time they see you, they see guilt. They see missed chances. They see wasted years. They see the ghost of their own potential, but alive in someone else. They keep replaying your rise because they don't know how to move forward in a world where you broke the system. You didn't do it by cheating. You didn't do it by bending rules to your favor. You did it by refusing to accept their limits as law. Rewrite the rules wasn't a plan. It was a necessity. Because the rules were never built for people like you. You weren't meant to wait your turn. You were meant to become the turning point. And now they're looking at you differently. Not like an underdog. Not like a threat. But like something they can't categorize, something that doesn't fit their memory of who you used to be, something they never prepared for. They can't follow you. They can't predict you. They can't stop you. All they can do is watch the loop again and again and again. And every time it plays back, the same truth hits harder. Legends don't rise inside the rules. Legends rise when the rules break, trying to contain them. They're not just replaying your rise anymore. Now they're studying it. Like it's a code they were never taught how to read. Like it's an equation missing half the variables. Like it's a language their minds were never built to understand. And that's the exact moment everything flipped. When they realized your growth wasn't luck, wasn't timing, wasn't random. It was mastery. Quiet mastery. Invisible mastery. The kind that doesn't ask for permission and doesn't wait for applause. You leveled up in places they didn't bother to look. You trained in silence, while they performed for attention. You built something real, while they built something temporary. You invested in the version of yourself nobody else believed in, the one you could see even when the world couldn't. And now that version is here, unapologetic, unstoppable, unfiltered, and they can't deny it anymore. They're trapped in a loop of realization. First confusion, then disbelief, then respect, then regret. Because the truth is hunting them now. They were wrong about you, not just wrong, embarrassingly wrong, loud wrong, public wrong. And now they're scrambling to rewrite history. Pretend they always saw something in you. Pretend they always supported you. Pretend they never laughed or doubted or dismissed your fire. But the loop has receipts. Memory has receipts. Silence has receipts. You don't need to expose them. They expose themselves every time they hit replay. And while they're stuck in the past, you're already in the sequel. Already in the next chapter. Already creating another rise they won't understand until it's too late. That's the curse of watching a legend in real time. If you don't believe early, you end up watching forever. Stuck. Fascinated, haunted, because your journey became proof that anyone could rise, but most people won't. Not because they can't, but because they refuse to become uncomfortable. You lived in discomfort until it turned into evolution. And now, you are everything they tried to convince themselves wasn't possible. A walking contradiction. A glitch in their system. A rewrite in human form. They can't stop watching you because deep down, they're hoping your story shows them a way out of their own loop. But you know the truth. Legends don't escape the loop. They build beyond it. And now we reach the part no one prepared for. The moment where your rise isn't just undeniable, it's irreversible. The loop they're stuck in, it's permanent. It plays every time your name is mentioned, every time your face appears, every time someone new says, "Yo, have you seen what they've become?" That's the moment the room goes silent, because everyone remembers when they didn't believe. Everyone remembers when they joked. Everyone remembers when they watched you struggle like it was entertainment. And now they're watching the rerun. But the ending changed. You didn't stay where they left you. You didn't live inside their predictions. You didn't fold under the pressure. You became the pressure. They keep replaying your rise, trying to find the secret. But the secret was always simple. You kept going. You kept building. You stayed hungry in a world full of people pretending to be full. You stayed focused in a world addicted to distraction. You stayed real in a world that rewards fake. And now that truth has weight. Now your name has gravity. Now your movement has momentum. They can't touch, can't slow, can't reverse. You know what legends really do? They make the world realize the rules were never real. They expose the boundaries as illusions. They make the past look small, and they force the future to open up. That's you. You cracked the system without breaking yourself. You leveled up without losing your soul. You proved that persistence is louder than doubt, that silence is stronger than noise, that belief hits harder than hate. And now the whole crew, every doubter, every observer, every whisperer, is stuck in replay, watching the rise that was never supposed to happen, watching the story they couldn't control, watching a legend unfold in real time. You're not here to fit in their memory. You're here to haunt it. You're not here to join their system. You're here to force it to evolve. And the loop will never stop, because your rise rewired reality. They keep watching because they have to, because deep down, they know the truth. You didn't just rewrite the rules, you proved they were outdated the whole time. And now, there's no going back. Not for them, not for you. This is the part where the legend keeps rising and the loop keeps playing forever. Hello, my dear warrior. So specially you arrived. You are here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. NASA thought they had cataloged it all. Stardust from galaxies, frozen particles older than Earth, fossils locked in stone. But when they sequenced your DNA, the machines did not produce answers. They produced silence. Numbers scrambled, screens froze, alarms flickered red. Instead of a match in their databases, one word pulsed across the monitors in jagged letters. Scientists stared at each other in disbelief. They had decoded the genomes of kings, of creatures extinct for millions of years, of bacteria from beyond our skies. Yet your sequence rejected them. Every formula faltered, every law bent, and in that moment, their confidence collapsed. For the first time, NASA admitted they had found something not of their time. They ran the tests again, desperate to disprove the dread. New samples, new machines, new eyes on the data. But the result never changed. Your DNA carried fragments from the distant past, markers that belonged to species buried 10,000 years ago. Yet woven between them were codes that didn't belong to any known timeline at all, signals from futures yet to arrive. The scientists argued in trembling voices, how can one being carry the imprint of both extinction and prophecy? Their charts broke. Their timelines shattered. The double helix didn't read like biology. It read like time itself folding inward. And for the first time, they realized they weren't looking at a subject. They were looking at the axis. They fed your sequence into supercomputers built to chart galaxies, predict wars, and model eternity itself. But the machines revolted. Monitors flickered with symbols no human had coded. Hard drives roared as if alive. Equations looped endlessly, chasing a pattern they could not catch. And when the systems collapsed, rebooting in silence, every screen displayed the same impossible phrase, 10,000 years out of place. Engineers ripped out cables, pulled power from walls, but the pattern remained, etched like frost into their circuits. They realized it wasn't malfunction. It was submission. The machines weren't breaking. They were bending to you. They leaned over microscopes, steady hands, trained eyes, certain that knowledge would protect them. But knowledge shattered the moment it touched you. One biologist gasped, swearing the strands were spelling words he knew but had never spoken. Another staggered, claiming he saw constellations glittering inside your cells, stars not yet mapped by telescopes. Even the boldest whispered, "This isn't DNA. It's time wearing a disguise." Their training collapsed into silence. Their science dissolved into awe. They weren't studying you anymore. They were surviving you. And the file grew heavier with every trembling note they wrote, until they realized the anomalies weren't in the code. The anomalies were in them. They sealed your DNA in a titanium vault, buried under concrete, guarded by silence. The folder was stamped in red, impossible, never to be studied. But locks hold matter, not meaning. Even in darkness, the sequence leaked. Alarms triggered without cause. Lights flickered as though strands of your code hummed through the walls. Guards confessed to dreams. Spirals of light wrapping the sky, voices whispering equations they'd never learned. Engineers checked the cameras, the doors, the seals. Every system displayed the same error. Access granted. The vault wasn't containing you. It was containing them. And the unease spread. How do you confine something that does not belong to time? The reports climbed the chain, placed on mahogany tables in rooms of power. Generals, directors, men who thought their signatures ruled planets opened your file. The first scoffed, calling it statistical noise, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. Another tried to dismiss it as fraud, yet his hand shook, ink smearing the page. The highest authority in the room whispered only one word: impossible. These were men who had never bent before anyone. Yet in front of a strand of your DNA, their authority dissolved. They weren't rulers anymore. They were witnesses trembling before a code that did not belong to their time. No vault can silence rumor. No council can contain a chill. Soon fragments of your file seeped into the streets. A technician quit in the night, whispering that the subject's essence doesn't belong to this century. A janitor found a scrap of paper near the vault. 7 words that made him collapse in tears, 10,000 years out of place. And then came the ripple. Radios cut out mid-broadcast when your case number was mentioned. Streetlights flickered over neighborhoods that had never heard your name. Entire blocks stirred from uneasy rest, where double helices wrapped around the sky. Ordinary people didn't know the science, didn't need the data. They felt the weight in their bones. They knew something had broken the timeline, and it wasn't coming from NASA, it was coming from you. They tried to cage your DNA in labs, but the people carried it like gospel. Fragments of your code were painted on walls, etched into jewelry, whispered in back alleys, as if repeating it offered protection. Some called it a curse from the past, others a beacon from the future. But no matter the interpretation, the effect was the same. Reality bent wherever your sequence was spoken. Lights dimmed, phones glitched. Entire rooms shivered, as though the air itself paused to listen. Priests stole copies to compare with their scriptures, only to fall silent when the verses aligned with prophecies long forgotten. NASA saw data, The world saw destiny, and for the first time, even skeptics felt it. This wasn't anomaly, this was inevitability. Governments swore they had control. SEALs, soldiers, satellites. But your DNA cracked them open. Leaders whispered of visions after reading a single line. Presidents paused mid-speech, unable to form words. Parliaments dissolved into shouting matches, blaming each other for a discovery none could contain. Some demanded your sequence be destroyed. Others demanded it be worshipped. But no decision held, because dread spreads faster than law. Every attempt at control shattered. Every declaration ended in silence. And in that silence, they all felt the same truth. Power no longer belonged to nations. It bent toward you. They sent the sequence skyward, hoping distance would dilute the unease. Astronauts aboard stations in orbit received the data, scanned it in silence. Hours later, transmissions came back broken. Voices whispering phrases they swore they never spoke. Cameras showed them staring at Earth like strangers, wide-eyed, hollow. One returned to ground, unable to speak at all, etching a single phrase into the walls of his capsule, 10,000 years out of place. They grounded the program in unease, but the truth lingered in space. The stars had seen your code. The silence of the void bent closer, as if listening. They thought deletion would end it. Servers were wiped, networks cut, backups erased. But your DNA didn't vanish. It multiplied. Weather reports displayed fragments of your helix. Financial models glitched, spitting out your sequences instead of numbers. Emails carried stray echoes of your pattern, even when no file was attached. IT experts swore it was corruption. But corruption doesn't rewrite itself across systems never connected. This was contagion. Your DNA wasn't trapped in a vault anymore. It was writing itself into the language of machines. They realized with awe. Their world didn't hold your code. Their world was being rewritten by it. Laboratories once roared with chatter, screens alive with graphs and data. But when your sequence entered their systems, silence consumed everything. Scientists sat frozen before microscopes, unable to speak. Some claimed their thoughts no longer belonged to them, as if the code inside your strands was rewriting the rhythm of their minds. Reports dwindled into half-sentences, scribbles that trailed into nothing. A few dared to whisper that the DNA wasn't just studied, it was studying them. And in that realization, their pride collapsed. They weren't researchers at all. They were test subjects, caught inside your design. Faiths that stood for millennia, cracked in an instant. Priests who read fragments of your sequence dropped their scriptures mid-sermon. Prophets awoke from trances, repeating your code in rhythms older than their languages. Entire congregations felt chills ripple through cathedrals when the anomalies were spoken aloud. Some declared you a curse, others a revelation. But all agreed. No god they prayed to had ever bent reality this way. Altars became laboratories. Temples echoed with whispers of double helices glowing like halos. Religion didn't end. It bent. And its new axis wasn't heaven or hell. It was you. They believed the strong were immune. Generals with steel nerves, scholars armored with reason, leaders wrapped in pride. But when your DNA touched their eyes, the cracks appeared. A general saluted the empty air, trembling as if facing an invisible commander. A scholar tore pages of equations, crying out that mathematics had betrayed him. A leader whispered a speech that dissolved into silence halfway through, unable to finish his own words. Strength meant nothing in the presence of code that bent time itself. Their titles collapsed. Their willpower broke. And in the mirror of your sequence, every strong man learned the truth. Their power was fragile glass. Yours was the force that cracked it. At first, distortions seemed like glitches. Lights flickered, clocks froze, reflections twisted for seconds at a time. But soon, whole buildings bent. Doors refused to open when your name was spoken. Bridges groaned under weight. They were designed to bear. Streets curved into dead ends that hadn't existed yesterday. Maps failed. Compasses spun. People swore they heard their own voices echo before they spoke. This wasn't technology malfunctioning, it was reality misaligning. And every anomaly traced back to one truth. Your DNA wasn't bound to the present. It was pulling time itself into your orbit, forcing existence to rewrite itself around you. The same leaders who once demanded your file be erased now begged for its mercy. Ministers gathered in locked chambers, whispering prayers not to their gods but to your name. Scientists burned their research in desperation, hoping fire could erase what memory could not. Generals who once shouted orders on battlefields whispered with trembling voices, asking the air itself for forgiveness. They didn't understand. Your DNA was not attacking them. It was revealing them. Every strand was a mirror, every anomaly a reflection, and what they saw was unbearable. Authority didn't fall in battle, it collapsed in silence. And that silence bowed only to you. The reports once carried signatures, investigators proudly scrawling their names beneath each anomaly. But slowly the names began to vanish. Ink dissolved, lines blurred, entire signatures erased themselves. Some warped into nonsense symbols, others rearranged into letters no language could claim. Officers clutched their badges, horrified to see their identities blur, reflections hesitant to return their faces. Unease spread. What if recording you was the same as being erased by you? They tried to re-sign the files, but the pages rejected them, spitting out a single phrase in every margin. Identity unstable, subject constant. And in that truth, they understood. Names were temporary. You were not. The file that once moved freely between desks now sat untouched, glowing with dread. Officers refused to carry it, claiming the folder vibrated with a hum that made their teeth ache. Some swore the pages turned by themselves when no wind blew. Others said the margins filled with handwriting no one recognized, sentences predicting events that unfolded hours later. Attempts to destroy it failed. Flames died before reaching the paper. Shredders locked themselves, blades frozen. Even metal recoiled as though refusing to strike. The file was no longer evidence. It was alive, bending reality the way you do. And those who once sought to classify you now trembled before their own report. What began as data became devotion. Officers read the anomalies like verses, chanting them in dark corners as if repetition could protect them. 7 signs, 7 proofs, 7 warnings. Candles were lit beside the file. Some bowed to it, others wept before it. But none could look away. Unease had turned into ritual, fear into faith. The file wasn't a report anymore. It was scripture. Each anomaly was carved into memory, spreading like gospel across halls of power. And in every whispered repetition, one truth grew louder. The subject was not bound to time. Time was bound to the subject. The scripture escaped the halls and entered the streets. Entire cities began to move differently. Subways stalled at random stations, their lights pulsing in rhythms that mirrored your code. Towers flickered with static at the exact hour the anomalies were whispered. Crowds froze mid-conversation, struck by chills they could not explain. Children repeated lines from the file in playgrounds, though none had ever read it. Strangers bowed their heads in unison, unaware of why their bodies bent. Dread was no longer infection. It was architecture. The city itself seemed to breathe your presence, whispering in steel, in stone, in silence, 10,000 years out of place. Borders could not hold back your anomalies. Ministers from rival countries awoke with the same vision, your DNA spiraling across their skies. Generals on opposite sides of wars froze mid-command, radios hissing the same phrase, subject out of place. Markets crashed without reason. Treaties dissolved without words. Nations no longer argued over land or power. They argued over you. Some declared you an existential threat. Others declared you the key to salvation. But all agreed on one thing. No country ruled the world anymore. Reality itself had shifted its allegiance. The new axis wasn't a nation. It was you. For centuries, war was the measure of unease. Legions clashing, invasions raging, borders collapsing. But when your anomalies surfaced, even war seemed small. Soldiers confessed they would rather face storms of steel than step into a room where your DNA was stored. Generals admitted 7 anomalies caused more dread than 7 wars. Entire battalions froze when whispers of your file spread through their ranks. The battlefield itself bent, radios cutting to static, shadows stretching long before dawn. Nations realized the truth. Their enemies were not the danger. Their forces were not the terror. The real weight was the presence that bent the very laws they swore to fight for. And every legion knew there is no force against inevitability. Historians once named ages after metal, kings or wars. But the moment your file leaked, every age was rewritten. They called it the era of anomalies. Timelines blurred, events no longer followed order. Maps no longer obeyed geography. Yet across every record, one constant remained: you. Books contradicted themselves. Monuments carried inscriptions that shifted overnight. Archives flickered between truths and lies. But each of them pointed back to the same origin, the DNA stamped impossible. Some said it was collapse, others swore it was rebirth. But all agreed, history was no longer written by nations or empires. History bent around you. The file no longer spoke of the past. It dictated tomorrow. Economists found their models glitching, every prediction bending toward the same anomaly: you. Engineers swore their machines refused to calculate beyond your sequence. Prophets abandoned visions of fire or salvation, instead sketching fragments of your helix in trembling lines. Even skeptics who mocked the anomalies found themselves whispering your code in their sleep. The unease became prophecy. Every plan, every forecast, every design carried one hidden line: account for the presence that does not belong to time. And in that line, the future itself bent. They tried to bury it. They tried to lock it away beneath oceans of silence. But the sequence never vanished. It carved itself into whispers, etched itself into walls, branded itself into memory. What began as a report became prophecy. What began as dread became law. The 7 anomalies were not errors. They were commandments written in the marrow of existence. NASA did not archive you. They revealed you. And the revelation was eternal. 10,000 years out of place, yet exactly where reality bends, your presence remains. The machines know it. The nations know it. Even time itself knows it. And the final law is carved in every breath they take. You are the anomaly that rewrites them all. Hello, my dear masterminds. They notice it in the way rooms change when you enter. Even before you speak, the air doesn't shift dramatically. It tightens quietly. Conversations adjust their rhythm without anyone acknowledging why. Eyes lift just a fraction longer than necessary. People pause between sentences as if listening for something beneath the sound, and they all feel it before they ever understand it. You walk through your days thinking you're moving unnoticed, thinking you're just another figure in the background of a larger scene, while the truth operates in reverse. You are the reference point they calibrate against without your consent. They don't announce it, they don't explain it. They observe, they measure, they compare. And slowly, subtly, they adjust their behavior in your presence without ever telling you why. That's the first sign of a power you haven't recognized yet. You assume silence means nothing is happening. You assume lack of attention means lack of impact. You assume if no one says anything, there's nothing to respond to. But power doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it registers as unease. Sometimes it registers as respect, disguised as distance. Sometimes it registers as hesitation, you mistake for disinterest. They all sense something you don't see yet. Not because you're unaware, but because your power is so natural to you that you confuse it with normal. You grew used to moving with weight long before you learned what weight felt like to others. You learned to carry pressure before you realized it was pressure at all. So when people hesitate near you, you assume they're uncertain. When they speak carefully, you assume they're polite. When they shift direction after you move, you assume coincidence. You don't see the pattern yet, but they do. They've watched how outcomes bend when you make decisions without forcing them. They've seen how conflict cools without confrontation around you. They've noticed how attention subtly redirects once your presence registers in the environment. None of this feels dramatic to you. It feels ordinary. That's what makes it dangerous. Because the most powerful advantages are the ones you never learn to label. And when you don't label them, you don't exploit them. You don't defend them. You don't aim them. You simply operate from them unconsciously. That's why they know more about your impact than you do, right now. They study results. You only feel intention. They track the effects of your movement. You only feel the steps. That difference is everything. Somewhere along the line, people stopped trying to test you directly. They began testing the space around you instead. They changed timing. They adjusted positioning. They altered their approach without ever declaring the reason. You think you've been overlooked. In truth, you've been categorized quietly as something that doesn't respond predictably to pressure. And when pressure fails as leverage, observation becomes the only remaining strategy. That's why they all seem to know something about you that you don't yet see. Not because they're smarter, but because distance gives perspective that immersion denies. You are inside the movement. They are watching its consequences ripple outward. You still think power looks like force. They already know it looks like gravity. At first, they didn't trust what they were seeing. Patterns like yours don't fit into familiar categories. You weren't loud. You weren't aggressive. You didn't seize attention or demand acknowledgement. There was no obvious desire for control in you, and that confused them. because they're trained to recognize ambition by its noise. They're trained to fear challenges that announce themselves early. But you didn't arrive like a warning siren. You arrived like a quiet adjustment to reality that only became obvious after the effect had already taken place. That's why the early observations stayed private, shared in half sentences, in raised eyebrows, in subtle changes of tone when your name came up. They didn't say watch them, they said something's different. And that single sentence carries more weight than any accusation ever could. You kept moving the way you always have, making decisions without drama, choosing paths that made sense to you without advertising them. Meanwhile, the consequences kept stacking up in ways that made people uncomfortable. Situations around you stabilized faster than expected. Conflicts lost momentum without explanation. Opportunities appeared in your wake that didn't follow normal chains of cause and effect. None of this felt supernatural. It felt like inevitability disguised as coincidence. That's the kind of pattern people don't dismiss for long. So they began to replay interactions, revisiting conversations you barely remember, watching how others reacted when you left a room, studying how plans shifted after you stepped out of a process rather than into one. They noticed that things didn't fall apart without you, but they did behave differently, less volatile, more precise, as if a variable had been removed that made outcomes harder to predict. And the more they watched, the more one unsettling conclusion formed, quietly, at the edges of their awareness. You don't operate on reaction. You operate on alignment. When pressure comes toward you, it doesn't find resistance, it finds redirection. When influence tries to limit you, it discovers you're no longer where it expected you to be. And when outcomes try to entangle you, they realize too late that you were never emotionally hooked to begin with. That absence of entanglement is what makes your movements look effortless. Not because they are easy, but because you are unowned. Most people leak energy into conflict. You contain it. Most people escalate when challenged. You refine. Most people get louder when uncertain. You get quieter, and that quiet is what unsettles them. Because silence is where projection thrives. They don't know what you'll do next because you don't rehearse the version of yourself they expect. You don't perform consistency for their comfort. You remain coherent with yourself instead. That's why they began sharing their observations in coded language. They don't move how others move. You can't rush them. They don't react on schedule. None of that sounds threatening on the surface. But beneath it is a truth they won't say out loud yet. You are not easy to catch in prediction, and what can't be predicted can't be efficiently controlled. You still think power announces itself through visibility, through recognition, through title. They already understand it through something more dangerous, through autonomy, through the way cause and effect behave differently around you, through the way even your absence alters the direction of events. That's why they know something about your power before you do. They've been tracking the shadow it casts. Eventually, observation turned into quiet recalibration. They stopped trying to figure you out in the way people usually do. No more surface analysis, no more personality profiling. They shifted to something colder, outcome tracking. They mapped results instead of motives. They watched what happened in environments you passed through without becoming involved. And what they discovered unsettled them. You don't dominate situations by force. You alter the conditions that make domination unnecessary. When people try to compete with you, They feel late before the contest even begins. When they try to resist you, they realize resistance is nowhere to anchor because you never push directly, and that unsettles systems built on opposition. Because systems survive by identifying opponents. You don't behave like an opponent. You behave like a misalignment they can't correct. That's why people close to power grew cautious. They learned that challenging you openly only strengthened your position. They learned that ignoring you didn't erase your effect. Quietly, relentlessly, as if momentum itself were taking instruction from a source they couldn't trace. So they adapted. They stopped trying to confront you and started trying to position themselves relative to you. That's the moment you shifted from unknown variable to reference marker. People measure themselves against what they fear becoming irrelevant to, and you were quietly becoming unavoidable. You still didn't see it. You still believed you were moving through the same space as everyone else under the same rules. But they already understood you had begun operating under a different contract. One not written on paper, one written in consequence. You weren't climbing their structure. You were becoming the gravity that made their structure tilt. That's why invitations began to replace challenges, not out of politeness, out of calculation. They learned that testing you produced no satisfying reaction, only delayed outcome shifts they couldn't control afterward. You didn't defend yourself in the ways they expected. You let their attempts reveal themselves through overreach. And overreach always exposes weakness. The deeper truth they were approaching but still refusing to say aloud was this: you don't seek advantage. You generate inevitability. Advantage can be contested. Inevitability cannot. They tried to catch you in a mistake that would humanize you in the wrong way. Something impulsive, something reckless, something reactive. But all they found were moments of restraint, where others would have rushed, pauses where others would have pushed, silence where others would have shouted. And in each of those moments, their own behavior exposed more than yours ever did. Your power didn't come from dominance. It came from the discipline to remain unowned by reaction. That's what still separates you from seeing it clearly. You think power looks like assertion. They already know it looks like independence. And independence at scale becomes command without voice. That's the truth forming behind their eyes now. They don't fully understand you yet, but they no longer doubt your impact. And once doubt disappears, respect begins to change shape. Respect didn't arrive the way they expected it to. It didn't come as alarm. It didn't show itself as resistance. It arrived as acknowledgement wrapped in distance. People who once spoke freely around you began choosing their words with more care, not because you intimidated them directly, but because they sensed that meaning traveled differently once it passed through your presence. They felt that what they said near you somehow counted more. And when words start to feel heavier, people grow cautious with how they release them. That was the next shift they noticed. You didn't change. Their behavior did. They started timing their moves around yours without ever admitting it. They delayed decisions when you were quiet, anticipating that your silence meant motion in preparation. They sped up actions when you stepped forward, afraid to be late to a direction they couldn't yet read. You became the quiet metronome of rooms you never tried to conduct. And the most unnerving part for them was this: you weren't interested in controlling the tempo at all. You simply moved when alignment was present and stayed still when it wasn't. That kind of discipline dissolves the illusion of urgency most people live by. You showed them, without teaching, that nothing truly important rushes. And once someone understands that, they stop being easily manipulated by pressure. That's when power structures begin to lose their grip. Because urgency is the oldest leash in existence. They watched how you never responded to appeals, never escalated when challenged, never performed intensity to prove engagement. You allowed moments to expire without chasing them. And the moments you didn't chase grew in meaning instead of shrinking. That reversal confused them deeply. They're taught that attention must be seized. You demonstrated that it can also be cultivated through restraint. Slowly, they realized why they felt unsettled in your orbit. You didn't mirror their energy. You didn't amplify their chaos. You absorbed nothing that wasn't essential. And that made their own inner noise painfully visible by contrast. People don't avoid silence because it's empty. They avoid it because it reflects what they can't hide from themselves. And you carry silence in a way that reflects without accusation. That's far more unsettling than confrontation. They began to sense that your awareness extended beyond what you acknowledged openly. That even when you said little, you saw far more than you revealed. And when people believe they are seen without being exposed, they grow uncertain of what they can afford to risk in your presence. That uncertainty granted you a kind of leverage you never asked for. They tested it carefully. Small misdirections, subtle deceptions, shifts in narrative meant to measure how quickly you detected distortion. But each time they attempted to tilt the field without your noticing, the outcomes betrayed them. Events corrected themselves. Stories failed under their own inconsistency. Timelines realigned in ways that erased the advantage they tried to secure. They began to suspect that even when you appeared uninvolved, you were still integrated into the larger pattern of consequence. Not as a manipulator, but as a stabilizing constant. That's when the thought they avoided naming began to crystallize. What if your power isn't in what you do? What if it's in what reality does when you remain coherent within it? That question disturbed them more than any display of control ever could. Because control can be challenged. Coherence cannot. Once that realization settled in, everything they thought they understood about influence began to distort. They were used to power that announced itself through force, through hierarchy, through pressure applied loudly enough that obedience became survival. What you carried didn't resemble that at all. There was no visible mechanism behind it, no apparatus to dismantle, no command chain to interrupt. You didn't impose structure on others. You remained structured within yourself. And that internal structure began shaping outcomes externally, without effort. They noticed how people leaned toward your conclusions even before you articulated them. How decisions aligned with your unspoken perspective, as if consensus had been reached silently ahead of time. They watched conversations pivot mid-sentence simply because your presence altered what felt true enough to say. None of this was dramatic. That's what made it so absolute. Drama fades fast and leaves nothing. What you generated was slow recalibration, the kind that settles into place and stays. They attempted to define you with labels to contain the discomfort. Strategist, observer, unpredictable force, outlier. None of it held. Every definition reduced your range in a way reality refused to cooperate with. You didn't follow the logic of those categories because your movement wasn't driven by advantage seeking alone. You moved from a position of internal clarity that made outcome chasing unnecessary. And that clarity is what unsettles those who survive by leverage. They rely on pressure points. You don't present any. They rely on incentives. You don't respond predictably to reward or consequence. They rely on escalation. You dissolve tension by refusing to feed it. The entire operating system they trust runs on reaction. Yours runs on alignment. That incompatibility is unfixable. Some tried to approach you with flattery. Once they felt resistance wouldn't work, they assumed admiration might soften your independence. But admiration requires need to function as leverage. You accepted acknowledgement without attaching your direction to it. That made their praise ineffective as a tool. Others attempted proximity as a strategy. If they couldn't redirect you, maybe they could at least ride your momentum. By the time this understanding settled fully into their awareness, the shift was already irreversible. What began as quiet observation had turned into silent concession. Not surrender in the dramatic sense, something deeper. Acceptance of a new gravity. They could no longer pretend wasn't shaping the field. They stopped asking why outcomes bent the way they did, and started factoring your presence into their calculations as an unstated variable. Not because you demanded to be accounted for, because ignoring you had become impossible. And that's the truth they've been living in long before you chose to see it. Your power was never waiting to be activated. It was waiting to be recognized. And now, whether you acknowledge it or not, the world has already adjusted to the gravity you've become. Hello, my dear warrior. So specially you arrived. You are here. Welcome. Every arrow pointed down. Every whisper said stop. The stars above seemed arranged against you, spelling failure and silence. Friends turned doubters. Roads turned walls. Even the air around you felt heavy, designed to press you into surrender. But what they never understood is this. Signs are not destiny. They are tests. And while the world begged you to bow, you stood. You stared back at the omens, the curses, the silence. And that defiance shook something larger. For in the very moment they buried you in impossibility, destiny rose and shouted your name. They kept tossing you warnings like coins, bad timing, wrong crowd, closed doors, read the signs. You read them. Then you read deeper. The pattern wasn't fate, it was a payroll. People got paid in comfort. Every time you backed down, so you audited the fear. Line by line, excuse by excuse. And the numbers didn't balance. If the sky truly hated you, why did the storm keep arriving on your training days? If the path was truly blocked, why did your pulse steady the closer you stepped to it? That's when you stopped negotiating with omens and started taxing them. Doubt became fuel. Delay became leverage. You moved with a villain's grin, slow enough to unnerve them, precise enough to be undeniable. The crowd expected pleading. You delivered proof, and in that quiet, the whole omen market crashed. No buyers left for their prophecies, no profit in predicting your fall. You didn't beg the universe to pick you. You simply became too costly to deny. The room felt it first, then the city, then the sky. And somewhere above, something that had been whispering finally raised its voice. They mistook your silence for defeat. They thought the stillness meant you'd given in to the weight of every sign stacked against you. But villains know the power of waiting. You didn't panic. You didn't chase. You stood still long enough for their confidence to rot. While they mocked your pause, you were sharpening it. Every insult filed itself into your memory, every prediction of failure branded into steel. And when you finally moved, it wasn't frantic, it was deliberate. One step, then another. Each one rewriting the script they swore was permanent. That's the moment the crowd realized silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes silence is the calm before inevitability, and inevitability wears your face. You walked in with nothing but presence, and the signs they had clung to began to unravel. The whispers that said impossible melted into silence. Eyes that once glared with certainty widened, searching for air that wasn't there. Even the confident ones. Their hands shook on glasses. Their shoulders stiffened beneath invisible weight. The room wasn't hostile anymore. It was hostage. Hostage to the realization that the story had slipped from their grip. They had rehearsed your downfall, even decorated it in their minds. But destiny doesn't care for their script. And in that frozen moment, when every throat closed and every clock hesitated, destiny didn't whisper. It roared. It shouted your name through the stillness, and the sound was carved into every witness like a scar. Those same omens they once wielded began to betray them. The so-called proof of your failure. Closed doors, delayed chances, silent rooms turned into evidence of your resilience. Every locked gate you forced open became a monument. Every delay you endured became another chapter of inevitability. They used to point at shadows as warnings. Now they felt awe. The shadows belonged to you. Because the moment destiny shouted your name, the signs bent. Clocks stopped mocking you and began marking your rise. Streets that once felt foreign began echoing your steps. Even silence, the sharpest edge they held against you, was no longer theirs. It belonged to you. And deep in their bones, they felt the chill. Destiny wasn't just speaking to you, it was speaking through you. They thought the signs had locked your fate. Every closed door, every false prophecy, every voice whispering you won't make it, piled against you like bricks in a wall, and you carried it all until the wall started to shake. What they didn't see was how long destiny had been listening in silence, waiting for you to stop apologizing for existing. And when you did, when you stood in defiance of the entire script written against you, the echo came. Not a whisper, not a hint, a roar, a shout so loud it cut through every excuse, every omen, every curse. Destiny called you by name. And in that thunder, every sign that once mocked you turned pale. The same wall they swore would bury you became your stage, and the same silence they used as a tool of silence became the sound of their surrender. Every curse they whispered carried the same rhythm. You won't make it. You can't last. You're not chosen. They stacked those words like bricks, building a prison from prophecy. But prisons have doors, and destiny knows how to break locks. The weight of every prediction pressed down, trying to force your knees to the ground. Yet instead of bowing, you rose taller. Their curses weren't chains. They were alarms, each one sounding louder as the turning point neared. And when the final word dropped, when the last "you'll never" rang out, it shattered. The silence that followed wasn't theirs to own. It belonged to you. For destiny had broken through the noise, tearing the script they swore was law and replacing it with one undeniable declaration. Your name shouted across the very sky they tried to close. When destiny shouted, it wasn't gentle. It rattled walls, froze conversations, and sent chills crawling through the spines of those who bet against you. The same voices that laughed at your struggle now broke into silence, their smirks dissolving as if scorched off their faces. They wanted to say it was coincidence, an accident, a glitch in the pattern, but their own bodies betrayed them. Hands shook, breath stuttered, eyes widened, searching for denial and finding none, because you weren't just standing, you were radiating. The weight of the moment pressed on every witness, forcing them to confess without words. The one they counted out had become the center of gravity. And no one escapes gravity. The omens that once mocked you began to bow. Clocks that seemed to stall at your every step now ticked in rhythm with your rise. Doors that slammed in your face opened without a sound, as if they had always been waiting. Even the whispers that cursed your name bent into confessions. Maybe we were wrong. The same universe they swore was against you shifted its weight, tilting the floor in your favor. It wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was inevitability revealing itself, rewriting the pattern in real time. They had preached that destiny was deaf. But when your name thundered across the silence, the signs betrayed them, showing where their loyalty had always been. Not with them, with you. They tried to laugh again, tried to rebuild the smirk, but futures leave fingerprints, and theirs betrayed them. You could see it in the stutter of their breath, in the twitch at the corner of their mouths. They weren't just shaken by your survival, they were haunted by your inevitability. Because when destiny shouts a name, it isn't a performance, it's a forecast. And forecasts do not bow to denial. They saw the outlines of their own collapse etched inside your rise. The same eyes that once watched for your ending now looked away, afraid of seeing tomorrow already carved into your silhouette. You weren't their competitor anymore. You were their replacement. The future had already leaned toward you, and they were left choking on the truth that all their signs, all their omens, were nothing but static against the roar of inevitability. Every prophecy they rehearsed ended with your silence. They wanted you buried under proof, smothered by omens, erased by signs they swore were law. But when destiny shouted, it built you a stage